Then for our chapter 2, and the topic will be about population. And these are the questions for the chapter 2. First, where in the world do people live and why? When geographers study population, we explain population traits across space. Demography is the study of the population, and population geographers work with demographers asking why demographic problems vary not only from region to region and country to country, but also within countries. Demographers report the population density of a country as a measure of the total population relative to land size. Population density assumes an even distribution of the population over the land. The United States, for example, with a territory of 3,717,425 square miles, had a population of 302.7 million in 2008. This yields an average population density for the US of just over 81 per square mile. And this density figure is also known as the country's arithmetic population density. And in a very general way, it emphasizes the contrast between the US and such countries as Bangladesh, the Netherlands, and Japan. And no country has an evenly distributed population and arithmetic population. And the figures do not reflect the emptiness of most of Alaska and sparseness of population in much of the West. In Egypt's territory, it's mostly desert, and the vast majority of the population is crowded into the valley and delta of the Nile River. And an estimated 98% of all Egyptians live on just 23% of the country's land. So the arithmetic density figure is meaningless in this case. And as you can see from the figure 2.1 and 2.2, and its physiologic population density. It is defined as the number of people per unit area of agriculturally productive land. And this is just the population density map of Asia. Then, for the population distribution, people are not distributed evenly across the world or within a country. 1/3 of the world's population lives in China and India. Yet each country has large expanses of land where people are absent or sparsely distributed. In addition to studying densities, geographers study population distributions or the descriptions of location on the Earth's surface where individuals or groups live. And geographers often represent a number of a population. They often present the population distribution on dot maps, as you can see. Okay. Medyo malabo lang yung kuha kasi in-scan ko lang to. wherein the one that represents a certain number of population. Yeah. As you can see, the population distribution in India and in China. Saan pinakamadami ang population. Then the word population distribution and density. And in East Asia, although the previous distribution requires no color contrast, on the next figure, it depicts population density through shading. Darker the color, the larger the number of people per unit. Yan yung, dito papasok yung sa kanina, yung thematic map. The most extensive area of dark shading lies in East Asia, primarily in China, but also in Korea and Japan. Yan. In addition to high population density in China's large cities, ribbons of high population density extend into the interior along the Yangtze and Yellow River valleys. And farmers along China's major river valleys produce crops of wheat and rice to feed not only themselves but also the population of major Chinese cities such as Shanghai and Beijing. Then in Southeast Asia, the second major population concentration also lies in Asia and is similar in many ways to that of East Asia. At the heart of this cluster of more than 1.5 billion people lies in India. And this extends into Pakistan and Bangladesh and onto the island of Sri Lanka. Two physical geography barriers to create the boundaries of the South Asia population cluster, the Himalaya Mountains to the north and the desert west of the Indus River Valley in Pakistan. Kung sa East Asia, majority of them are farmers. In South Asia naman, the pressure on the land is even greater, and in Bangladesh, over 152 million people are crowded into an area about the size of Iowa. Mostly dun sa over the large parts of Bangladesh, the rural population density is between 3,000 and 5,000 people per square mile. And for the rural population density was well under 30 people per square mile. Yan, makikita nyo yung Himalayas. The barrier. In Europe, an axis of dense population extends from Ireland and Great Britain into Russia and includes large parts of Germany, Poland, Ukraine, and Belarus. It also includes the Netherlands and Belgium, parts of France and northern Italy, and this European cluster contains over 715 million inhabitants, less than half the population of the South Asia. Then the comparison of the population and physical maps indicates that in Europe terrain and environment are not as closely related to population distribution as they are in East and South Asia. Unlike sa Asian extensions, which reflect fertile river valleys, sa Europe naman, magre-reflect yung population density sa coal fields. Because if you look closely at the physical map, you will note that the comparatively dense population occurs even in mountainous or rugged country. Then in North America has one quite densely populated region stretching along with the urban areas of the East Coast from Washington, D.C. in South Boston, Massachusetts in the north. On Figure 2.8, the cities in this region agglomerate into one large urban area that includes Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York City, and Boston. Urban geographers use the term megalopolis to refer to such huge urban agglomerations. And the cities of megalopolis account for more than 20% of the U.S. population. Then the reliability of this population data. When the United States planned and conducted its 200 population census, various groups protested the practice of trying to count every single person in the country. Rather, many advocates of homeless minorities and others insisted the census practices resulted in a serious undercount of these disadvantaged populations. And much federal government funding depends on the population data. Siyempre, kung hindi naman lahat ng yung nakikita nating mga nakatambay sa streets ay sila ay citizen ng country. And these advocacy groups urge the census to sample yung population man lang and derive population statistics from these samples. And if you compare the population data reported by each of these sources, you will find inconsistencies in the data. And data on population, growth rates, food availability, health condition, and incomes are often informed estimates rather than actual counts. Then why do populations rise or fall in particular areas? In the late 1960s, alarms sounded throughout the world with the publication of Paul Ehrlich's The Population Bomb. He and his colleagues warned the world's population was increasingly too quickly and was outpacing our food production. And tracing back to 1798, when British economist Thomas Malthus published an essay on the principles of population. And in this work, Malthus warned that the world's population was increasing faster than the food supplies needed to sustain it. And his reasoning was that food supplies grew linearly. And kumbaga yung mga crops ay same amount lang yung na-produce kada harvest. Whereas yung population ay, the number of population ay, it grows exponentially. And Malthus assumed that the growth of food production was linear, but food production has grown exponentially as the acreage under cultivation expands, mechanization of agricultural production diffuses, the improved strains of seeds are developed and more fertilizers are used. Ito yung hindi inaasahan ni Malthus. Because yun nga, nagkakaroon na din naman ng research when it comes to crop production. At yun nga, hindi nagkatotoo yung prediction ni Malthus. Because countries are not closed systems. And Malthus did not foresee yung kakayahan ng globalization. Then, population growth at world, regional, national, and local scales. Analysis of population growth and change requires the attention of scale. In this section, we examine population growth at different scales, but we must be mindful that what happens at one scale can be affected by what is happening at other scales and in other places at the same time. Keeping in mind that population change in one place can be affected rapidly by what is going on in a neighboring country or at the regional scale. One can gain some insights by looking at population change within the confined territory of a country. And to calculate the natural increase, we simply subtract the deaths from the births. This is kind of simple statistic to calculate and comprehend. However, calculating the natural increase misses two other components in a country's population. Yung immigration, tapos yung emigration. Kumbaga yung immigration, which along with birth, adds to the total number of population. At yung emigration, yung kumbaga outmigration, which along with deaths, subtract from the total population, yung pag-alis. And one way to easily grasp the growth rate in the world population is to compare a population's rate of growth to its doubling time, which means it is the amount of time it takes for a given quantity to double in size or value at a constant growth rate. Then, as you can see, 2,000 years ago, the world's population was estimated at 250 million. More than 16 centuries passed before this total had doubled to 500 million. Hanggang sa nadoble na lang, nadoble. The doubling time was down to 100 years and dropping fast. And the population explosion was in full gear. Today, siguro world population is doubling in 54 years, and the continuing slowdown in the estimated doubling rate is one of the bright spots in the problematic demographic picture. Then the population growth at the regional and national scales. The world map of population growth rates confirms the wide range of natural increases in different geographic regions. In the mid-20th century, the population of the former Soviet Union was growing vigorously. 30 years ago, India's population was growing at nearly 3%, more than the most African countries. Then India's growth rate fell below that of sub-Saharan Africa. And today, Africa's rate of natural increase is still higher than India's. But now the sub-Saharan Africa faces the impact of the AIDS epidemic, which is killing millions and also reducing the life expectancies and curtailing the growth rates. Then the map also reveals the continuing high growth rates in Muslim countries of North Africa and Southwest Asia. Saudi Arabia has one of the highest growth rates in the world, but some smaller countries in this region are increasing even faster. South Asia is the most important geographic region in the population growth rate picture. The region includes a country that appears destined to overtake China as the world's populace, India. South America is experiencing significant reductions in natural population growth rates, and the region as a whole is still growing at 1.5%. But in Brazil's population, it declined from 2.9% in the mid-1960s to 1.4% today. And the populations of Argentina, Chile, and Uruguay are growing at rates well below the world average. As you observe, yung mga slowest growing countries, including those with declining rates of natural population increase, lie in the economically wealthier areas of the world, extending from the US and Canada across Europe and Japan. In the southern hemisphere naman, yung Australia, New Zealand, and Uruguay are in this category also. Because wealth is not only the reason for negative population growth rates. When it comes to the Russians' population is declining because of the social dislocation in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Yun nga, yung mga pag-deteriorate ng health conditions, yung high rates ng alcoholism and drug use, their economic problems combine to shorten life expectancies. No single factor can explain the variation of the mentioned countries, because economic prosperity as well as social dislocation reduce natural population growth rates. Economic well-being associated with urbanization, higher levels of education, later marriage, family planning, and other factors lowers population growth. And also yung cultural tradition, it can also influence the rates of population growth. Because religion, for example, has a powerful impact on family planning. Then population growth at the local scale. In India, some states record population growth rates far above the national average. These states lie mostly in the east of the country, but other states in the west and southwest region are growing much more slowly. In the 1960s, when census numbers revealed the extreme growth rates in parts of the country, the Indian government instituted a national population planning program. And during the 1970s, the Indian government began a policy of forced sterilization of any with 3 or more children. Kumbaga, dito sa kanilang pinanukalang program, they allowed for a shotgun license in exchange for sterilization of 2 people and a revolver license in exchange of the sterilization of 5 people. And yun nga, abuse began almost immediately with wealthy landowners sterilizing their laborers in exchange for gun licenses. So, in other district naman, they encourage naman by providing access to housing and extra food for people who agreed to be sterilized. And today, most Indian state governments are using advertising and persuasion. No guns for sterilization. Para ma-encourage yung mga families na magkaroon ng konting anak. Then, the demographic transition. The high population growth rates now occurring in many poorer countries are not necessarily permanent. In Europe, population growth changed several times in the last 3 centuries, and they used data on baptism and funerals from churches in Great Britain to study changes in birth and death rates of the population. They expected the rate of a natural increase to vary over different periods of time. And demographers calculated the crude birth rate, the number of live births per year per 1,000 people in the population, and the crude death rate, which means the number of deaths per year per 1,000 people. Then the church data revealed that before the Industrial Revolution began in Great Britain in the 1750s, the country experienced high birth rates and high death rates. With small differences between the two, the result was low population growth. In the AD 1000, then the Industrial Revolution diffused through continental Europe. Other advances also helped lower death rates. Sanitation facilities made the towns and cities safer from epidemics, and modern medical practices diffused. Because, yun nga, yung the birth rate and death rate in Great Britain as of today declined to low levels, resulting in low or stabilized population growth. And yun nga, tawag ng demographers sa pag-shift na population growth is demographic transition. And the beginning of the Industrial Revolution ushered in a period of accelerating population growth. During the Second Agricultural Revolution, farmers improved seed selection, practiced new methods of crop rotation, selectively bred livestock to increase production and quality, employed new technologies, and consolidated land holdings for greater efficiencies. Ito yung demographic transition model. Yan ay number. The population. And the birth rates fell at a slower rate, leading to a population explosion growth, and the increase in the rate of population growth in Europe spurred waves of migration. By the mid-1900s, the declining death rates in Africa, India, and South America brought a rapid population increase to this region. And many countries in Latin America and Asia experienced falling birth rates later in the 20th century. Dito sa mapapansin nyo dun sa the demographic transition model, in some phase, kung makikita nyo yung death rate, it because in this time, uso yung mga epidemic and plague because hindi na pa naman medically advanced yung mga tao. So, there is no cure for it. Even before naman the 18th century, yung for Great Britain and the rest of Europe, death rates exceeded birth rates during the bubonic plague, or what they call the Black Death. Then why does population composition matter? Maps showing the regional distribution and density of populations tells us about the number of people in countries or regions, but they cannot reveal two other aspects of those populations: the number of men and women and their ages. These aspects of population, which is the population composition, are important because of populous country where half of the population is very young and has quite different problems from a populous country where a large proportion of the population is elderly. When geographers study populations, they are concerned not only with spatial distribution and growth rates, but also with the population composition. The composition is the structure of population in terms of age, sex, and other properties such as kahit yung marital status, education. Then, they use the term population pyramids to represent these rates visually. And as you can see, the population pyramid displays the percentage of each group in the total population by a horizontal bar whose length represents its share. As you can see, the males in the group are to the left of the center line, the females to the right, and a population pyramid can instantly convey the demographic situation in a country. As you can see, the population composition in the poorer countries. Then, in the wealthier countries, kung alin ang mas madami, male or female, and on what age. Then, how does geography of health influence population dynamics? The condition of a country's population requires much more than simply knowing the total population or the growth rate. Also, of significance is the welfare of the country's people across regions, ethnicities, or social classes. And among the most important influences on population dynamics are the geographical differences in terms of the sanitation, the prevalence of disease, and the availability of healthcare. Sa infant mortality, one of the leading measures of the condition of a country's population is that infant mortality rate. The infant mortality rate is recorded as a baby's death during the first year following its birth. And infant mortality is normally given as the number of cases per 1,000 live births. Infant and child mortality reflect the overall health of a society. Kung mataas yung infant mortality, and for sure it has a variety of causes. The physical health of the mother is also being considered. In societies where most women bear a large number of babies, the women also tend to be inadequately nourished, exhausted sa work, they are suffering from a disease, or they are poorly educated. And also, demographers report that many children die because their parents do not know how to cope with the routine childhood problem of diarrhea. And this condition, together with malnutrition, is the leading killer of children throughout the world. Then also, ay consider din natin yung poor sanitation as a threat to infants and children. Then, the lowest infant mortality rate among larger populations has been reported by Japan, with 3 deaths per 1,000 live births in a country of over 128 million people. In 2008, 22 countries still reported an IMR of 100 or more, and several had rates of 125 or higher. Sierra Leone and Afghanistan had the highest IMR, which is 165. Globally, the infant mortality rate has been declining, even in the poverty-stricken regions of the world. Because ayon sa Office of Minority Health and Health Disparities in the US, the leading causes of infant death include congenital abnormalities, preterm or low birth weight, or sudden infant death syndrome, problems related to complications of pregnancy, mga respiratory distress syndrome. Yeah. The IMR in the US also varies by region, with the highest IMR in the south and lowest in the northeast. Because surprisingly, yung US ay second highest sa newborn death rate in the world. The race, ethnicity, social class, educational levels, and access to healthcare also vary by region. And these correlations are found for many health problems from diabetes to heart disease. And as you can see, kung aling part sa US yung may pinakamataas na infant mortality rate. Next, the child mortality rate. The infant who survived their first year of life still does not have long life expectancy in the poorer areas of the world. Sa CMR, recording the deaths of children between the ages of 1 and 5 remains staggeringly high in much of Africa and in Asia. Notably, this country, they are in the protein deficient tropical and subtropical zones. Yun nga, they have a lack of protein in early life. Nagkakaroon sila ng sakit na yung marasmus, a condition that results from inadequate protein and insufficient calories causes the deaths of millions more in the Africa and in Asia. Next, the life expectancy. Another indicator of society's well-being lies in the life expectancy of its members at birth. The number of years, on average, someone may expect to remain alive. At the start of the century, the world average life expectancy was 68 for women and 64 for men. And not only are these levels exceeded in the wealthy countries of the Western world, but great progress has also been made in East Asia, where Japan's life expectancy are the highest in the world. By contrast, the tropical sub-Saharan African have the lowest life expectancy because doon sa part na yun, the spread of AIDS over the past 2 decades has lowered life expectancy. Then life expectancy can change in relatively short order. In the former Soviet Union, the life expectancies of males dropped quite precipitously following the collapse of communism, from 68 to 62 years. And ayun naman ay sa male. Pero in the female life expectancy, from 74 to 72 years. Yung life expectancy figures do not mean everyone lives to a certain age. The figure is just an average that takes account of the children who die young and the people who survive well beyond the average. And a person who has survived beyond childhood can survive well beyond the recorded life expectancy. The low life expectancy figures for the malnourished countries remind us again how hard hit it will be for the children are in poorer parts of the world. Then influence on health and well-being. People who live in Iceland do not need to worry about contracting malaria unless they travel to the parts of the tropics where malaria prevails. Possibly yung people who live close to animals or who lives in close proximity to animals, including the livestock, they run a greater risk of catching certain disease. And when an outbreak of particular disease occurs, its source and diffusion are studied by specialists. And medical geographers study diseases, and they also use locational analysis to predict diffusion and prescribe prevention strategies. Katulad nung sa dun sa part na ginawa ni Dr. Snow sa Soho District. And diseases can be grouped into categories: the infectious disease, chronic disease or degenerative disease, and the genetic or inherited disease. Yung infectious disease resulting from an invasion of parasites and their multiplication in the body, and we all know that. Then the chronic or degenerative disease, the maladies of longevity and old age, such as heart disease. Then the genetic or inherited disease, syempre, from our ancestors, the chromosomes, the genes that define our makeup. Yun. Then also the three geographic terms used to describe the spatial extent of the disease. Endemic, when it prevails over a small area. Epidemic, when it spreads over a large region. And pandemic, disease is global in scope. Again, endemic, it prevails over a small area. Epidemic, it spreads over a large region. And pandemic ay global na ang scope. Almost forgot, how do government affect population change? Over the past century, many of the world's governments have instituted policies designed to influence the overall growth rate or ethnic ratios within the population. Certain policies directly affect the birth rate via laws ranging from subsidized abortions to forced sterilization. And the policies fall into three groups: expansive, eugenic, and restrictive. In the expansive population policies, which encourage large families and raise the rate of natural increase. Then the eugenic population policies, which were designed to favor one racial or cultural sector of the population over others. Then the third, the restrictive population policies, reduce the rate of natural increase. And these policies range from toleration of officially unapproved means of birth control to outright prohibition of large families. Yung, for example, yung sa China's one-child policy, and yung and from that one-child policy, it drastically reduced China's growth rate from one of the world's fastest to one of the developing world's lowest. Under the one-child policy, families that have more than one child will be penalized financially, and educational opportunities and housing privileges were kept from families who broke the one-child mandate. Then the population policies has its own limitations naman. Population policies are not independent or circumstances that can influence growth and decline. In the 1980s, the government of Sweden adopted family-friendly policies designed to promote gender equality and boost fertility rates. And the programs focused on alleviating much of the cost of having and raising children. And also in Sweden, couples who work and have small children receive cash payments, tax incentives, job leaves, and work flexibility that last up to 8 years after the birth of a child. And also the children born in 1991 made up of a class of 130,000 of students in the Swedish education system. The government had to build a new classroom for the temporary population boom, but then faced excess capacity when the boom subsided. Kumbaga, as you can see in the economy when it comes to population, kapag mas madami yung kumbaga mga bata, hindi masyadong kumbaga magiging okay yung kumbaga economy, kasi syempre hindi pa naman kaya ng mga bata magtrabaho. Pero meron namang countries na mas madami yung matatanda. So it depends upon their kumbaga population composition din. And the contradictions. Some areas of the world with low population growth rates are in the very heart of the Roman Catholic world, because Roman Catholic doctrine opposes birth control and abortion. And adherence to this doctrine appears to be stronger in areas remote from the Vatican. For example, sa Philippines, we're in the Philippines, thousands of miles from the Vatican, in Asia's only Roman Catholic country, the still powerful Catholic Church opposes the use of artificial contraceptives, which the Philippine government supports as a method of controlling population growth. Kung baga mapansin nyo, the Church and the Philippine state agree on abortion, as the Philippine Constitution prohibits abortion. And among Islamic countries, the geographic pattern is the opposite. Saudi Arabia, the heart of Islam, has one of the fastest population growth rates. So yun nga, depende na din siguro sa government, sa religion, yung population growth rate. So, pakatatandaan nyo lang, there are so many factors that will affect the population growth when it comes to the government, the health, the religion, the population composition. Yeah. They are all connected to each other, to the economy. Yeah. Yan, just answer the thinking geographically. Hanggang 3 lang yung for the prelims na sasagutan.